Is it worth playing Planetside 2 in 2019? Really quick, guys, this is a really big topic, so it's a really big video. Down in the description, there are going to be timestamps to all the different topics this video covers. If you're only interested in the 60-second summary at the end that answers the question without the discussion, click the link for that. That said, let's dive in. Now, I didn't make this video right off the bat in 2019 because there was a few things that I needed to see play out. A lot of good things were announced at the end of last year. A new continent for Planetside 2, an upgrade to DirectX 11, a new feature, the NS Operatives, and a lot of bad things for Planetside 2 happened at the end of the year. Massive server instability and the announcement of Planetside Arena. So now that we're on the other side of everything's kind of settled back into its normal trend. We are in the holding pattern for the big Planetside 2 patches, and Planetside Arena has been delayed. Now, before I dive into the heart of this video this year, I want to explain the circumstances of when I released the first Is It Worth Playing Planetside 2 video. Planetside 2 content comes at a trickle. The year prior to the video, their big push was releasing the construction system, which ended up being a big flop. There was a massive influx of players checking the game out, but it was momentary. The population dropped off immediately. And after that happened, content development for Planetside 2 basically stopped. There was still ongoing changes, but nothing that could have serious impacts on the game. And for the rest of the year, H1Z1, King of the Hill, was really the star of the company, the star of the industry at that time. And by the end of 2016, it felt like Rel was about the only guy left working on Planetside full time. It was in desperate need of something, anything, that could prove to Daybreak Games it was worth keeping this game going. And to Rel and the rest of the team's credit, they delivered the Implant system, which for the limited resources they had was awesome. And more importantly, I expect it was very financially successful. Now, it was not very well received by the community. Monetization, and that's really what the Implant system was if you break it down, is tough to swallow. And this was a really tough type of monetization. Loot crate only monetization. If you let people buy things direct, you can kind of get away with loot crates. But loot crates only really rubs people the wrong way. And the game started trending down again, hard. So that's when I saw a moment that Planetside 2 could still prove it was viable to the greater gaming community and the management of Daybreak Games. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds had recently eclipsed H1Z1. It was the moment to say, hey people, don't give up on this game. And the community, you guys, responded marvelously. People shared the video, and the Planetside 2 community followed the discussion on it. They took the time to help the greater gaming community understand what was so great about this game. Some of you watching right now, your first exposure to Planetside 2 might be that video from back in 2017. And we leveled off after a pretty steep downward slide. In fact, that video's heyday is the last time Planetside 2 was above 2,000 concurrent players on Steam. And I rushed to follow that video up with all sorts of tutorials. Because that's the toughest thing about Planetside 2. They don't have resources to bring content for the veterans and bring what new players need at the same time. So we fended off a pretty bad slide, and we're able to coast a little bit longer. Then, near the end of 2017, we got a big punch to the gut. The Combined Arms Initiative and Critical Mass update landed, along with some changes that severely increased queue times. This patch was to Planetside 2, as the NGE and combat upgrades were to Star Wars Galaxies. Unfortunately, it just served no one. It did nothing for the veteran players that enjoyed and were accustomed to the current balance of the game. And Daybreak Games made no moves to advertise the game or bring on new players that might actually enjoy those changes. And there was certainly a slump after that. For reference, the 2017 holiday season had less population than the recent 2018 holiday season. But unfortunately, I have no control over these things, so all I can do is roll with the punches. It was sort of a put blinders on, try to move past, try to convince everyone it's not that bad. I had hoped the success of the Implant system would be playing out faster. The Daybreak Games would be running over to Planetside 2 and say, oh, hey, whoa, people are still willing to pay for this thing. Let's get back on it. H1Z1 was crashing down spectacularly. If we just were able to hang on to enough people until Daybreak Games was able to switch back over to this title and get something real done for it, we'd be okay. So I made the prediction that would rely heavily on Daybreak Games delivering something exciting in Planetside 2 in 2018, that Planetside 2 would surpass H1Z1 in average player count by the end of that year. Now that didn't happen, especially if you include PlayStation 4, as H1Z1 had a very successful launch there, and Planetside 2's version of PlayStation 4 really fell off at the end of last year. And secondly, Daybreak Games wasn't able to deliver anything big on the PC end. Now historically, the team always delivered a system that was, sure, part content, but a big part of it was monetization in the spring. It was construction in 2016, it was implants in 2017, and it was the ASP system in 2018. Now, while the construction system didn't really work, the monetization made sense. You paid dollars, you got things to do in-game, or it just worked as a reason to have a membership so you could grind through the content. The implant monetization system was different. It was gambling-based. It was lottery-based. It was evil. But I thought it was a necessary evil. They didn't have the resources in-house to actually make a good system, but I was certain at that point if the game did not see another form of monetization, development would cease, it would be in maintenance mode. So we had to try to push through, make sure there wasn't too much fallout from the system. This was the game's last chance. My hope was that we'd see the results of it in 2018, that spring patch, when they usually release something big, that they could build on the knowledge that the community was still willing to pay for this game and commit to something better than an implant gambling system. And then we could move on from that and say it served its purpose, but thank goodness it's over. And so the spring of 2018 rolled around. We were still suffering from gambling-only access to implants. We were still suffering from the effects of the Combined Arms Initiative. We were still suffering from the effects of the new critical mass alerts. And we were still suffering from the effects of the massive queue times. Now, I am okay with waiting patiently and quietly for the results of the implant monetization to play out, but in early 2018, so far it was looking like a large portion of that time after the windfall from the implant system was being spent on the Combined Arms Initiative, which was bad, and the critical mass alerts, which were bad. If there was something good coming from it, we were still waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then we got the ASP system. It was another big round of monetization with little to no content to show for it. Now, it wasn't bad like the implant system in that it wasn't locked behind gambling, but it felt extremely rushed, hastily thrown together, and offered nothing for non-veteran players. It was built entirely to make long-term players buy a membership again and do that grind to Battle Reich 100 one more time. Now, I am all for a prestige system, but this one, while not evil, not lottery-based or anything, it was certainly just disappointing. Now, I'm not a big fan of pitchforks, but I think they can do a lot of good when used at the appropriate time. The pitchforks have always seemed to come out just willy-nilly whenever someone wants to get upset about something. With the implants, the fact that they'd even try to monetize the game, they came out with trying to get the anti-cheat working, and they came out when Daybreak Games acquiesced to the request for a roadmap, but they weren't able to deliver on it fast enough. So to me, pitchforks had sort of lost their effect. Hopping into Rel's shoes, it seems like the pitchforks came after him hard for trying to get the game some financial backing through the implant system. But the implant system worked. Why should he be concerned about the pitchforks going forward? And to me, that's why we got the Combined Arms Initiative and the critical mass system. When the pitchforks came out regarding the Combined Arms Initiative, and the Reddit posts were mimicking the implant system, where someone would go get on and test the minor cloak implant and stir up a bunch of drama around it. With Combined Arms Initiative, people would go on the test server and point blank something from the rear and suggest that was somehow relevant to Planetside 2 gameplay. History taught us that pseudoscience testing was meaningless. Minor Cloak was released and it had zero impact on the game, even after all the pitchforks and the drama. Rel trusted his instincts on the implant system, and it paid off big time for the game. The pattern leading up to the Combined Arms Initiative looked exactly the same. But the reality was, by the time the ASP system rolled around, we now had lived a year with an evil implant system with nothing to show for it. And on top of that, with the ASP system, they decided not to test it. I got the impression that Rel and team felt like they ran 2 tests for the Combined Arms Initiative, but everyone was still upset at them. Why should they keep running playtests? And to me, that's the wrong conclusion to draw. If you ran 2 playtests and the community was unhappy with the results, you don't then run 0, you then run 4 playtests. You take more time to hear them, more time to figure out what they want, more time to sift through all of the bad pseudo-testing that part of the community is going to throw at you. But in doing that, you will then be able to find the good constructive criticism that was there during the Combined Arms Initiative and that would be there during the testing of the Prestige system. And so that to me was the time we finally actually needed some pitchforks. That was the hill worth dying on. The implant system was no longer a necessary evil, as nothing was being delivered because of it. It was just an evil. There was nothing to wait around for. We needed to get some of these bad things undone. So we raised pitchforks. And to the devs' credit, things happened. They had always said that making implants craftable was on the table, but they wouldn't do it. Within a couple months, they did it. We got away from gambling-only implants. The extra queue times got removed, and for the first time, they made some concessions on Combined Arms. They removed the invincible flak armor infantry and the instant detonating C4. The pendulum had swung super hard towards infantry during the Combined Arms Initiative, and with those changes, they pushed it back a little bit. So a lot good happened from that, but at what cost? Conflict just does not work as a way to get things for the game. It sort of just sours everyone towards everyone. It builds animosity and distrust between the developers and the community. Do I still think it's a hill worth dying on? Absolutely. The benefits far outweighed the cost. We could have limped on indefinitely if the alarm wasn't raised loud enough, with a lottery-only implant system. And so what was hopefully going to be a strong showing for Planetside 2 in 2018 sort of turned into a whimper. The year was saved by a bunch of things that created a lot of hype, and the release of a new server located in Japan. They announced a new continent for Planetside 2, they announced to be upgraded to DirectX 11, and they announced they were releasing the NS Operatives system, where one robotic character could play on any faction. So, as we enter 2019, the question stands. Is it worth playing Planetside 2? Look, I will never not recommend playing Planetside 2. If you have not experienced it, download it now. You should check it out before it goes away. The difference here is my recommendation in 2017 was based on hope and potential. Let's make a go of it. Let's try to make this thing work. Let's see past its current flaws and work towards a brighter future. At the time, it was a 4-year-old game. We had gotten over optimization, which wasn't content. We had gotten over a console port, which wasn't content. And we'd gotten over the construction system, which is content the game wasn't ready for. If we could finally get some content, maybe we could put it all together in something that worked. Things are different now. The game's pushing 7 years old, and the other shoe is finally dropped. While we were hoping the success of the implant system meant they were all going to pile onto Planetside 2 and make it great, it turns out they decided to go another direction and just make an all-new game, Planetside Arena. And they have a whole lot of words. After years of playing it close to the vest, for fear of disappointing people, all of a sudden they've made these major promises to deliver 10 times the content that they delivered in 2018. They even dangled in one of the dev letters the possibility of a successor to Planetside 2, not the Battle Royale one. They pulled out all the stops at the end of 2018 to try to soften the blow, but the reality is, they've moved on. The world is moving on from Planetside 2. And so I recommend it to you not as, hey, this game's going to make a turnaround. I recommend it to you as if you were entering a museum, where you're visiting the remnants of a world that reached for greatness. Something that was beyond a copy-paste of the last shooter game or the last RPG game. Something that was ambitious. Something that was glorious. Something that had it. Had something more that brought you back again and again and again back into that world. And you can spend some time in this place that the world has moved on from. Experience the last of the gunslingers that still ply their trade across the fields of Auraxis. Still doing what they do best, all while knowing the world has moved on. Now, the devs have put on a very strong face, confident that Planetside Arena and Planetside 2 can coexist. And under certain conditions, I think they could, but they're not the conditions created here. Planetside Arena is just a big statement of, we're going in a different direction. We think there's more people that want to play this type of game, and basically that's not the people that play Planetside 2. Daybreak Games is moving on from this user base in hopes that that other user base is bigger. But now that we're here, that we know Planetside 2 is not going to get the resources, and those are going to go into a different title, there's a few things that can be done to make Planetside 2's waning years a little bit better. The first thing is revert the Combined Arms Initiative in its entirety. I feel like Rel has already done the hardest part of this. He went to the community and said he was wrong, albeit on the Flash Cloak rather than Combined Arms Initiative, but it still would be the first major difficult step in reverting Combined Arms Initiative. The problem is, if he works from this side of the Combined Arms Initiative backwards, he's never going to get full credit. And tanks are just a small aspect of the gameplay. There still hasn't been any discussion about bringing one-hit kill Dalton shots on ESFs back. No matter what he does mucking around with the balance now, there was always going to be the opportunity for someone to say it was better before Combined Arms Initiative. If they did go back to pre-Combined Arms Initiative, back when there were drastically more resists they had to balance between all the vehicles, I think people would miss some things that went well in the Combined Arms Initiative. But I think most people would rather see us work towards those things from the front end of this balance patch, rather than try to recreate it from the back end. Here's the thing. Even if they do go and revert Combined Arms Initiative, it's not bringing people back. That ship has sailed, it's too late for any of that. But what it can do is save some face, save some credibility for Daybreak Games. I still, every now and then, get a comment where people say, oh, I'll never touch another game from SOE or DBG again because of what they did to Star Wars Galaxies. They have an opportunity here to undo Planetside 2's version of NGE and the combat upgrades. It's not about bringing people back at this point. It's about how they want Planetside 2 to be remembered. And people having the memory of Daybreak Games giving them the balance that was closer to what they like back. Even if they don't play Planetside 2 anymore, it will leave them with a better aftertaste in their mouth. And 5 years down the road, when they find some free time and they're looking for a game, they're going to be that much more willing to pick up a title from Daybreak Games, thinking about all the good times in Planetside 2, rather than remembering that one bad patch. Revert the Combined Arms Initiative, let the vets play out the last few years how they want. Doesn't mean there's no more balance to be done after that, but slow, methodical tweaking from there. And when it's time for people to walk away, they'll then walk away with just the good memories and not the disappointment. The next thing that needs to happen are server transfers. Look guys, the population is rough right now. And what really makes Planetside is when you can find big fights. Now, I didn't want server transfers to happen because I knew that meant the end. I felt like if we had 2 Euro servers and 2 US servers, we hadn't given up yet. We were staying away from maintenance mode. And I knew if a server was added or server transfers were allowed, it was the end, at least for one of those servers, which would mean it would be time to go down to 1 server per region. That has happened. Since the opening of Soltech, Connery has lost more than 50% of its population. It went from being the largest server to the smallest server in a matter of months. It is awesome that they can now better serve the community that's surrounding Japan, but they're leaving everyone else hanging that had to deal with the fact that they didn't provide a solution for when they closed the Korean and Chinese servers. So all those players came over here and scared away a lot of the population that was there. And now they are taking all of those players off that server, leaving that server mostly empty. Those players need to have an option to transfer to another server so they can reliably find large fights. The population of Planetside 2 has dwindled to the point where we need to go down to 1 server per region. This will allow the one existing server to open up 2 or 3 continents at a time, allowing for people that want smaller fights to find them on the off continents, and people that want to have the experience of 1,000 people on a continent at one time will get that during prime time. They have the technology now to allow server transfers. They can just open that up for the smaller servers and let people decide if they want to go to the bigger one, stay on the small one, and then make the decision later on if they need to close one down. They also need to open up the option of copying your PlayStation 4 character to one of the PC servers. When I chatted with PlayStation 4 players about this, there was mixed results. Most would just be done with the game if the PlayStation 4 version shut down, but many would happily take their character to PC if it could transfer over. The PlayStation 4 version has been severely dwindling, and there's a point where they just have to say, hey, we can't keep up with PC and PlayStation 4. We're going to give you guys a way to keep your character, but at this point we have to stop splitting our resources between PC and PlayStation 4. If you want to stick with it, come to PC. If you don't, we're going to keep the PlayStation 4 servers open as long as we can, but we can't spend a lot of time working on those because the average active user base on PlayStation 4 is less than 400 people. That includes the US and Europe combined. I know some players are concerned about high ping players with mergers, but the reality is they're already there. On Connery, if you ever had yellow text, you were ostracized. There was zero tolerance for high ping players. Emerald, on the other hand, has always been more tolerant of the laggers. They know that not everyone has a server in their region, and they understand it's just passionate people that want to play the game. And so even if people are walking around with yellow text, it's not the end of the world to them. They still accept them in the community. As the population continues to go down, in order to maintain good Planetside 2 fights, they will have to bring players from wider regions together to have a strong enough population. And finally, they need to drastically reduce the grind. My suggestion was to use a prestige system and basically throw a cert at new players every 100 experience. In this manner, they'd be able to slow it down for the veteran players, or if players stuck with it as they got higher, they would naturally slow down. But plenty of people will be upset if they go that route. So the other option is to just drastically slash cert prices on everything. I'm talking to the tune of like 80%. Make it so that if some new player wants to be a tanker, they can have a maxed out tank by battle rank 5. This whole barrier to entry of aircraft or tanks or anything does not work. That would be an opportunity to advertise and say, hey, this game's going on 7 years old. We're going beyond just free to play. We're letting you get most of the stuff for almost free. Come check it out now that there's not a crazy grind to get into it. And then they could basically use Planetside 2 as a showcase of potential. Some of you guys may remember from World of Warcraft, near the end of some expansions, they'd release a patch that either you got a stat buff or everyone got more powerful for the next expansion. So you could basically run through and clear everything you hadn't cleared yet in the previous expansion. It was a fun time where you basically got to see some of the fights you wouldn't have otherwise seen. And don't forget that they just straight up boost everyone's level that's jumping in late. So they give tons of opportunities for new players to catch up, which is completely non-existent in Planetside 2. This should be that time for Planetside 2. A time when new players can get into the game and not have that hurdle where they feel like they're under-geared compared to veteran players. Are they still going to get stomped even though they've unlocked everything? Absolutely. But that mental barrier will be gone. If they feel like there's not such a punishing grind, they could sit back a little bit and say, there are some cool things about this game. Again, with that concept, you're not really trying to take Planetside 2 forward. You're just trying to build a relationship with more potential customers. And they'll say, I came in late to Planetside 2 while they had this cool, easy experience event going on. It wasn't something that could ever be your main game at that point, but it was definitely fun, and I'll probably be checking out more titles from Daybreak Games in the future. So hopefully they're able to tackle some of those quality of life things early on in 2019. Now let's talk for a minute on things we know they're going to tackle in 2019. The first big thing is they're upgrading the game to DirectX 11. It's just a big round of modernization that the game desperately needs. Hopefully it delivers some extra performance. The reality is, I think for most players, it's not going to be a very tangible, visible difference, but that doesn't really matter, to be honest. If they do a little bit of advertising on Steam, say we did a big engine upgrade, should have some performance improvements, at least a certain group of people will come running, because that was their big gripe with the game. Whether it's a placebo effect or not, who cares? The game gets modernized, people will want to come to see how that went. And the next big thing they're working on is the NS Operatives, releasing the robots, which are sort of a fourth faction that is a mercenary system, which is also a monetization system. This new faction will be accessible only by paying members. So I would anticipate that ideally you release DirectX 11 and the NS Ops at the same time, because DirectX 11 is cool and all, but there's no direct way to monetize it. Other than those people that'll say, yeah, performance is good, I'm going to throw you some cash because you did good work. Having something tangible like the NS Ops where they can say, well, buy that membership and then you can go play this new faction. If you release that all at the same time with a little bit of Steam advertising, you should be able to see a bump in the player count like you did for the construction system. But a bump in the player count is cool and all. The big question, though, is can it keep any of those players around for more than 2 months? Is this the type of patch that will make people stay? And the answer to that is no. NS Operatives is a system that was requested by the community, so I appreciate that they're delivering something a lot of people asked for, but it is not content. The opportunity to level another Planetside character just is not that exciting. The character progression is not that fun, and it is an extreme grind. It just won't feel like new content, it'll just feel like an extra layer of a prestige system. But you don't get to keep your veteran character. For some reason, you gotta start again to do the prestige system. And with DirectX 11, again, it's long overdue, it's very necessary, but it is not content in and of itself. Performance is an ongoing battle that should always be worked on. But even if they could make this game run super smooth all the time, no matter what, it would not bring a whole bunch of people back and it would not make them stay. There will be a lot of people that say in response to this, that's all I need from Planetside. If DirectX 11 does that, I'm here for good. And that's awesome. Hopefully DirectX 11 will deliver for you. But I'm telling you, you're in the minority if that's all you need from the game to stick around. It will not grow just because they fix performance. I've watched the performance debate play out in every game out there, and whether or not people complain about the performance is not the determining factor in whether it's successful. Overwatch and PUBG are the most obvious examples. So while DirectX 11 is absolutely a necessary building block, and it will be a terrific bullet point for people to come back and check the game out, it is not something that will make players stay in and of itself. And the final big announcement is Oshur. This to me is a heroic undertaking that I'm not quite sure why it's happening. Hawson was under development with a much bigger team for a long time. And when it came out, it was generally rejected. For many people, it's their favorite continent. But when we had choices as to which continent we played on, Hawson was always the one that got skipped or left out. And outside of a new continent, I've seen the existing continents revamped multiple times to no real effect. In general, I would say the new bases are better than the bases they replaced. They just don't feel impactful. They don't really feel like they improved anything. Fighting there gets old and stale, just like the old bases got old and stale very rapidly. In fact, a lot of times I miss the old bases, which has far more to do with nostalgia than them actually being good bases. But good flow through a bad base would do a lot more for the game than what's going to happen with Oshur. Is going to be bad flow through what are hopefully great bases. Any base, no matter how well designed, is going to suck when you're getting spawn camped. Adding or changing bases at all before that issue is tackled just doesn't make sense to me. Okay guys, the final thing we have to talk about is Planetside Arena, because that's when Planetside 2 changed from it's an old game that just needs one great patch to breathe some life into it, to all the resources have moved on to a different game, it's never going to have enough dev time on it to make it there. Planetside 2's 2018 Christmas season was better than the year before in terms of average population, but that is because they teased new content like crazy leading up to it. They added an entirely new server for a population that had been cut off from the game for a long time. And they had many more double experience events leading up to Christmas to try to counter all of the bad server performance. All of these things artificially inflated Planetside 2's population. But once the news of Planetside Arena hit, Planetside 2's population has plummeted. Everyone sort of saw the writing on the wall, that Planetside 2's days were numbered because the next game in the series was here. It's not something where your membership works for both games. It's not something where you access them both from the same launcher. It's not something where you can progress one character by playing in Planetside 2 or Planetside Arena. These games will directly compete against each other. And while there will be a curiosity bump to Planetside 2 because of the Planetside Arena launch, it will be tiny and unsustained. Now, what I've seen so far from Planetside Arena is it's one more battle royale trying to compete in a very competitive space that doesn't have enough unique factors to make it successful. And while it's great that they pushed it back till the summer launch because it was in no way ready and it would have been crushed by Apex Legends, I don't see how they can make significant improvements to it by that time because they've added the extra work of launching on PlayStation 4 at the same time. But if they do, let's say they really take this time to develop a great massive clash mode, and I think really that mode in and of itself is not enough. Let's say they come up with 2 other great modes that are well thought out, well designed, and they are complete, polished, not buggy. Then I think Planetside Arena does have a chance to be something cool. But let's examine both of these scenarios for PlayStation 2. In the first case, if they spend all their time and energy trying to deliver on PlayStation 4 and can't really flush out the additional game modes, Planetside Arena will just be a silent flop. It won't give Planetside 2 a curiosity boost, but it won't be cannibalized either. In the event that they are able to deliver on some awesome game modes in Planetside Arena, then Planetside Arena will crush Planetside 2. Players will have to make the decision to jump over there, play the cool new hotness, grind the battle pass over there, and why try to maintain characters in 2 installments of basically the same game? Having the studio that develops Planetside 2 have their next big game flop is not good for Planetside 2. And having their next big game, which is the successor to Planetside 2, hit is not good for Planetside 2. Basically, for a guy like me that loves Planetside 2, cheering for or against Planetside Arena is cheering against Planetside 2. Okay everyone, that wraps it up for the discussion surrounding is it worth playing Planetside in 2019? I'm going to give a quick summary for anyone that didn't want the long version. In short, yes, I still recommend playing Planetside 2, even in 2019 while the game's going on 7 years old. I used to recommend it because I was hopeful that we could turn the game around. That Planetside could have that Warframe moment where a couple great patches are delivered and all of a sudden it starts going up and up and up. And 4 years down the road, it'd have 200 devs working on it. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. At this time, I consider the game past its prime in its declining years, but I still think it's worth checking it out if you haven't seen it because it was such a masterpiece. It's still worth being able to say, I was there, if only for a moment. The biggest change is the announcement of Planetside Arena. It's a very firm statement by Daybreak Games that they are moving on from Planetside 2 and looking for the next title. They say the titles will coexist, but they are not being developed in a manner that allows for that. The Planetside 2 development team does intend to deliver some great things in 2019, and I certainly think those things are worth checking out when they come out, but adding DX11, NS Operatives, or a new continent does not amount to improving the endgame in Planetside 2, so I don't think any of those things will deliver a lasting increase in player population. In this game's later years, I think there are 3 quality of life things Daybreak Games needs to deliver on as early as possible in 2019. Revert the Combined Arms Initiative in its entirety, and continue to work on balance from that point. Allow server transfers immediately between existing servers and give PlayStation players a chance to transfer their characters to PC. And finally, drastically reduce the barrier to entry for new players. Either give players tons more experience, or reduce the certification cost of items to an extreme degree, where the game is no longer about monetizing people, but attracting customers for future titles. Okay everyone, that's all for now. You may have seen a population chart creep up a few times throughout this video. I'm going to go more in depth on what it means in future videos. I've seen a few posted in the community on the subreddit. Unfortunately, they're all wrong. Not because the people posting don't know how to look at data, but because Daybreak Games' API did not include Soltech for the months leading up to Christmas. So the data set they're working with is not very accurate. In a future video, we'll discuss how we can come up with as accurate an estimation as possible, and what that tells us about the trend of Planetside 2's population. Again, thank you all for watching, and if you want to keep up with all the news surrounding Planetside and beyond, please make sure you're subscribing, liking, and sharing your thoughts down in the comments. Until next time, I will see you Planetside.